Welcome to the final overview video of Module 1, where we look back and reflect on some of the big issues behind the things we discussed. This is also an opportunity to deal with a number of normative questions inherent in both federalism and decentralization. What is important to remember here is that both federalism and decentralization have political consequences that cannot be reduced to technical soundbites. After all, both are part of the broader political, constitutional, social, economic, demographic and geographical contexts, both nationally and globally. While common patterns exist, one should be prepared to accept that a one-size-fits-all certainty does not. Such certainty is not warranted for an even-handed scholarly examination of the matter, particularly when trailblazing a new topic. Our scholarly analysis is about making sense of the complexity and seeking to identify broad generalizable patterns and to distill transportable lessons. But do note that our proposed explanations are probabilistic, because the state of our knowledge, especially in terms of federalism and decentralization's track record in Africa, is in its infancy. Hopefully, some of you will successfully complete this general introduction to the topic, further study and specialize, and become a student of comparative federalism, and then start contributing to the growth of this field of study. Scholarly inquiry is a cumulative process after all. The work continues, so there is room for you to contribute to the search for answers and thereby shape the inquiry. But until then, be suspicious of easy answers and quick instant fixes, especially when based on partial and potentially misleading diagnosis. In this overview, we will visit two sets of normative issues that are part of an even-handed scholarly analysis. The first normative point that needs to be clearly established is that our job is not to prescribe federalism and decentralization. Our course is about studying and examining the twin concepts in a balanced way, with an eye to both the positive and the negative effects, with attention to the promises as well as the pitfalls. Our goals are analytical. One should not conflate the subject matter of our course with an assumption that this is an unqualified political endorsement of federalism and decentralization. A related point is that our course is not about an ideal institutional design for federalism or decentralization either. Ours is a quest for proper diagnosis. Prescription can only follow this. We are still learning, so it is best not to try to run before we could master walking. Besides, there is a related ethical question here about scholarly responsibility. There are a number of political, constitutional, historical, economic, demographic, geographical factors that interact in a complex web. Both federalism and decentralization have different political consequences that affect different groups of citizens, which means that these decisions should be taken by those who are politically accountable for their decisions. The second normative point that requires attention is the need to remember that the key that unlocks the potential of both non-majoritarian political principles is a liberal tolerance towards dissent, disagreement and opposition. Both federalism and decentralization cannot deliver if they are not coupled with a sense of acceptance of different points of view. Of course, this is easier said than done, but we should never lose sight of the importance of this central element here. In this context, we should be aware of the seemingly harmless statements extolling national unity and harmony. Sometimes these majoritarian impulses can inadvertently delegitimize minority views, robbing the very tolerance that is needed for non-majoritarian politics to work. Not everyone's rights and wrongs perfectly align, and talk of national harmony and expecting unified behavior towards this goal, defined and determined by the majority, could be quite unsettling for minority groups. Both federalism and decentralization's promises rest on a sense of liberal democracy, and not a mechanical understanding of electoral democracy that sees politics as the electoral dictatorship of 50% plus one. In many ways, federalism is the formalization of a non-majoritarian principle in constitutions. The minority views, and potentially the right to dissent, is formally enshrined, albeit only in territorial form, establishing and protecting regional states. This means that the reach and range of the protective arm of federalism providing autonomy is limited to territorial matters, but it is, nonetheless, a bridgehead for non-majoritarian recognition and protection of minority views in liberal democracies. Federalism territorially does what the trias politica does at the centre. The trias politica divides political power between executive, legislative and judicial branches of governance in order to prevent the unaccountable concentration of power. Federalism seeks to prevent the territorial concentration of power and hold the centre accountable. This overview, concluding Model 1, looked at some of the big issues in the background. Firstly, our scholarly goal is about seeking an even-handed analysis of the politics of federalism and decentralization. And secondly, there is a liberal democratic premise that is behind both federalism and decentralization. Both of these will remain with us, but will stay in the background for the remaining modules. Model 1 was a general introduction, and inevitably, as general introductions go, we had to deal with a number of concepts and terms. In the following 5 modules, we will have the chance to go more in depth as our knowledge of federalism and decentralization advances. And this brings us to the third big issue in the background. What happens in one country is not always a reliable compass to fully capturing federalism and decentralization elsewhere. So especially for those of you who come from federal and decentralized countries, my advice would be to keep the verdict open until we complete the course. There might be political patterns different from what you believe is the case in your country. While we will continue to distill generalizable lessons that apply across the continent, please remember that we are still looking for answers and we'll be continuing to do so in the following modules. I'll see you in the next module. Thank you.